measures and the decisions that we will need to take to protect the NHS, to safeguard the economy, and to avoid the risk of a second peak that would be damaging both for public health but also for jobs and the wider economy. And as we consider the decisions that we will take next to protect life but also to protect our way of life, it's now clear that the second phase will be different. We will need to adjust to a new normal where we as a society adapt to safe new ways to work, to travel, to interact, and to go about our daily lives. We've never experienced anything like this first stage of COVID-19 in terms of the scale of the lives lost, but also the lockdown that it has required. And as we go forward, we want to make sure that the next phase is more comfortable, is more sustainable, and prevents lasting damage to jobs and livelihoods. But we need to be under no illusions. The next stage won't be easy. And if we're going to protect life and preserve our way of life, as I just said, we must continue to be guided by the scientific advice we receive and make sure the next steps that we take are sure-footed and sustainable. Now, before I hand over to Angela to run through the data slides, I want to provide an update on one further feature that coronavirus as a challenge has thrown up for this country and indeed for the whole world. Whilst the vast majority of people and countries have come together and rallied to this international mission to defeat coronavirus, there will always be some who seek to exploit a crisis for their own criminal and hostile ends. We know that cyber criminals and other malicious groups are targeting individuals, businesses and other organisations by deploying COVID-19 related scams and phishing emails. And that includes groups that in the cybersecurity world are known as advanced persistent threat groups, sophisticated networks of hackers who try to breach computer systems. And we have clear evidence now that these criminal gangs are actively targeting national and international organisations which are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, which I have to say makes them particularly dangerous and venal at this time. So we're working with the targets of those attacks, with the potential targets, and with others to make sure that they're aware of the cyber threat and that they can take the steps necessary to protect themselves or at the very least mitigate the harm that could be wrought against them. So with that in mind, today the UK's National Cyber Security Centre and the US Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency have published a joint warning about these groups. And we've offered some advice on the cyber criminals and other actors who are seeking to exploit COVID-19 through malicious cyber activity. Our teams have identified campaigns targeting healthcare bodies, pharmaceutical companies, research organisations, and also various different arms of local government. Now, there are various objectives and motivations that lie behind these attacks, from fraud on one hand to espionage. But they tend to be designed to steal bulk personal data, intellectual property, and wider information that supports those aims, and they're often linked with other state actors. Now, we expect this kind of predatory criminal behaviour to continue and to evolve over the coming weeks and months ahead, and we're taking a range of measures to tackle that threat. So as we've done today, we'll share advice on the nature of those threats to enable businesses, citizens and our international partners to better defend themselves against the full range of cyber attack from hostile states to criminal gangs. Preventative action is often the very best way to deny attackers the opportunities that they're looking for. The National Cyber Security Centre offers a range of practical advice to safeguard against cyber attacks, from things like using the use of online passwords to guidance on what are the trusted sources of online information related to COVID-19, like the gov.uk sites or Public Health England. Now, as well as providing practical advice, the UK will continue to counter those who conduct cyber attacks, and we're working very closely with our international partners to respond to the threats, but also to deter the gangs and the arms of state who lie behind them. We're absolutely determined to defeat coronavirus and also to defeat those trying to exploit the situation for their own nefarious ends. that, I'll pass over to Professor McLean to give us the latest update on the data.
Thank you. If I could have the first slide, please. So the first slide reminds us what are the 5 tests for adjusting lockdown. And number 1 is that we should always ensure that the NHS has enough capacity, that it's able to provide critical care and specialist treatment right across the UK. The second is that we should see a sustained and consistent fall in daily deaths from coronavirus. And the third is that there must be reliable data to show that the rate of infection is decreasing to manageable levels right across the board. Fourth is that operational challenges, including testing and PPE, must be in hand with supply able to meet future demand. And fifth is that we should be confident that any adjustments that are made to current measures will not risk a second peak of infections that overwhelms the NHS. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is a slide about transport use and how it's changed in Great Britain since since February. So those percentages are relative to normal use during February. And the vertical dotted line is the date when lockdown started. And what you see is that for public transport, there has been a very marked and very persistent fall for bus, for tube, for national rail, and also in grey further back for buses in London. For motor vehicles, so that's the top dark blue line, what you see is a pattern that looks a bit like commuting because it's low every weekend, and we do worry about that creeping up. I think all of us remember that what we've done together, which is to stay home, has worked to protect the NHS and save lives. And as one of the people who looks at this data and thinks about how it fits into how we think about the future, it does trouble me that the dark blue line is creeping up again. Next slide, please. This is the number of tests that have occurred every day in the UK since 6th of April up until the most recent data, which are from yesterday. And what you see is that very dramatic rise that happened during April, so that now we do have a lot of tests available that allow us to design the kinds of testing strategies that we're going to need in the future. Next slide, please. This is one of the ways we have of counting how many people in the UK are infected. So in 2 colours here are